if you're holding a cup of hot liquid, you'll describe your relationship with your mother in much better terms than if you weren't. How is it that our interactions with the world around us help us to understand ourselves as well as that world that we interact with? In this unit of psychology, we'll be looking at sensation, perception, and consciousness, beginning first with sensory processes, how we take in data from the world. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. King Owen. In psychology, we define sensation as the reception of signals from our environment, whether those are light signals to our eyes, sound signals to our ears, the touch on our cheek. The signals themselves are sensed by our five senses. But making sense of those signals is the job of perception. Perception is how we organize and interpret the data that we bring in from the outside world and make sense of it in the brain. So while our sensory organs take in information, it's the brain that tells us what it is and what to do with it and what it means. The pathway of sensation to perception runs from energy in the outside world through a structure in our bodies that collects that energy, like an ear or an eye. That energy is put into a form that our bodies can process, a neural response that's sent via nerves to the central nervous system. It goes to the brain's postmaster, the thalamus, except for smell. And the brain then uses the data that it gets to analyze what the signal means in light of what we already know and what we've already experienced. That is the pathway from sensing information to making sense of the information. When psychologists began investigating sensation and perception, they were interested at first in the limits of human sensing. We call those limits absolute thresholds, meaning what's the minimum amount of energy before we can detect something. So it's the lowest level of stimulation from sensory data coming from the outside that can be detected 50% of the time. That's our operational definition of an absolute threshold. So if we flash light at you, what's the lowest level of light that you can detect 50% of the time? If we play a sound, what's the lowest level of that sound that we can detect 50% of the time? This is known as an absolute threshold. But wait, would absolute thresholds be the same for everybody? Maybe not. Think about these absolute thresholds. Vision, a candle flame from 30 miles away. Hearing, a mosquito buzzing from 10 feet away. Smell, 1 drop of perfume in a 6-room apartment. 1 teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water, and touch, the wing of a fly falling on your cheek from 1 centimeter. People have detected these 50% of the time. Does that mean, though, everyone can detect them? It might be that an absolute threshold doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a rule for every human being on the planet. After all, we're all different with different experiences and different capacities. What if your smell has been affected by COVID? Well, probably not going to detect a drop of perfume in a 6-room apartment. Psychologists have also investigated the kinds of data that fall beneath our conscious awareness. We call these stimulus pieces of information subliminal, which literally means under the limit or under the line, limen in Latin. A subliminal threshold is below our ability to consciously sense it, and therefore it has a very limited effect on us. Sometimes we suspect it's there, but we can't be really sure because it's not within our conscious awareness. A famous experiment on this looked at whether or not flashing ads for food in movie theaters so quickly that people couldn't see them still might affect people's desire to get food. Although there are problems with that experiment, it did show that there was an increase in interest in food, which got psychologists interested in this idea about how sensory data below our conscious awareness might in fact reach our brains at some deep level and affect us still. Duke University has done experiments where they have used subliminal data to show that it might inspire creativity by flashing information that is so fast that we cannot consciously see it. Psychologists are also interested in the difference between data. So when you turn the volume up or when you turn the lights down, when do people notice? So a threshold difference or a difference threshold is the difference between a change from one part of the stimulus to another level of that stimulus. The term we use for this is a JND, the smallest difference between two stimuli that can be detected. So if you're listening to a piece of music and I turn it up, what is the difference between the first volume and the second volume that you can actually detect? If I turn it just a tad, will you hear it? Do I have to turn it way up before you can even hear it? Interestingly enough, we often do not notice the difference between a stimulus that we've taken in and then a change in that stimulus. This is known as change blindness. So let's say I turn the volume up. Chances are good you might not catch it unless I turn it way up. And interestingly enough, if the volume is really loud already, I have to turn it way, way, way louder for you to even detect any change at all because it's already at the maximum volume. So our blindness to the change around us when we don't notice a change in a stimulus is an important aspect of studying our sensation and perception of the world. And in fact, it's not a weakness. We could take in all the data in the world all day long, but what would we do with it if we took in every piece of information all at once? The fact is, we have to discard large amounts of our information. And that means sometimes we won't notice changes. It's just the way we're wired. So psychologists have asked then, when do we notice something? We notice something when it becomes important to us. This is a key learning in the study of sensation. When data matters to us, when visual information matters to us, when sound information matters to us, we will notice a change much more readily. The term for this is the cocktail party effect, and it's where you kind of imagine yourself at a party. You hear conversations going on around you. You don't pay attention to all the conversations. You can't. If you did, you'd be overloaded with conversational data. But let someone say your name across the crowded room, suddenly you will perk up and you will notice the change in that room. So keep in mind that we could be paralyzed by taking in all the data of the world around us, but we're not. We're actually wired to just sift through it and not pay attention to data that isn't relevant or isn't important. It's just the way we are. Psychologists then talk about an important aspect of sensation that is unique to each person, and that is attention. The reason we don't all perceive the same things the same way, or the reason we don't even sense them the same way, is we attend to different things for different reasons. Your attention links your sensation and your perception to the experiences that you have. So you pay attention to things that matter to you, that you care about, that you find interesting or cool or useful. Attention directs our senses, our eyes, our ears, to things that we think are useful to know or valuable or important or interest us. So we see things when they matter. I think about this every time I drive my vehicle, because I notice all the other people who drive the same vehicle that I do. If I bought a new car and a different kind of car, I'd probably notice that car more as well when I was on the road. Attention also selects certain information for further processing. We can't keep all the data we take in. It would just overload us. We've just got to focus on and attend to some of it, and then ponder what it means and how should we understand it. Attention then allocates our energy mentally for processing the things that we care about. So while you see lots of things during the day, you only attend to and use mental energy for the things that matter to you. When we miss information because we're focused on things that we care about, psychologists call that inattentional blindness. That is, it's not like change blindness where we don't notice a change. This is where we just don't notice something because it doesn't matter to us. So you focused on a person in your immediate area because they're important to you, but while that was happening, you missed another person doing something funny or something crazy or whatever might be going on around you. This is normal. This is natural. This is the way human beings are wired. We can't focus on everything, and that's why we do miss things. This is why driving is very, very critical, because we want to give all of our attention to the road. When do you get into accidents? When you're changing the radio, changing songs, turning your head to have a conversation with your friend, looking at your phone. All those things take your attention away from the task at hand. And sometimes our inattentional blindness leads to catastrophic results. So we selectively attend to the world around us. That's normal, that's natural, but it does mean that sometimes we miss things that are important to us, or might be important for us to know. For example, the time that I turned around really quickly in church and walked smack into a pole separating the parts of a double door. I was focused on a conversation that I'd had, focused on then leaving the building so I could hurry out and get to lunch, and completely missed the fact that there was a pole there, and I banged my head right on into it. Human beings like to divide their attention to many things because there are lots of cool things going on around us, lots of sounds and smells, feelings of the breeze on our skin or someone touching our arm. All kinds of data comes our way. And we divide our attention between those various sources of data. We aren't as good at multitasking as we like to think we are. I like to say that multitasking is really an inaccurate term overall, because you can't do many tasks at once. You can only allocate your brain energy to one thing at a time. Can you shift back and forth between those different tasks? Yes. And some people are better at that than others. So I could jump from reading a book to updating Canvas, to grading a paper, to petting the cat, to watching TV, and yeah, it looks like I'm multitasking. But in fact, what I'm doing really is dividing my attention. Sometimes we stop paying attention to the world around us simply because it bores us. Our senses are no longer responding to the data. This is known as sensory adaptation. When our sensory receptors are bombarded by a constant piece of information, they stop responding to it. We essentially fatigue our sensors. We see something, we see something, we see something, we see something, we see something. Our eyes eventually just get tired of responding to that. The data no longer necessarily brings out a response in our nerve cells. Your brain is pretty good at recognizing what changes in a scene around you, but not always. And the job of the thalamus essentially is to tell your eyes, look, you've been looking at that thing for the last 10 minutes. Stop wasting precious neuron energy to that. It's not changed. You can ignore it until there actually is a change. The thalamus is actually pretty good at sending signals around the brain to help us figure out what we're looking at. When you make a personal decision in your behavior to stop responding to a piece of information that's a constant stimulus, we call that habituation. Where sensory reception happens in your sensors, like your eyes or your ears, habituation happens essentially as your body's response to a constant stimulus. I think a good example of sensory adaptation might be jumping into a pool when it's cold and you're first shivering, the water is cold in the water, but eventually your skin stops responding to that chill. You no longer notice the chill, and your behavior changes as a result. You become comfortable in the pool, you swim around, you aren't shaking anymore. Looking at sensation, or where the sense organs take in data from the outside world, whether that's sight or sound or touch. But we're going to take a shift now and look at perception. Because if you truly think about it, we don't see the world with our eyes. we see with our brains, we hear with our brains, we feel with our brains. Our brains are where we make sense of all the data that we take in, and that is perception. We take in all kinds of data all the time. Like, for example, these funny looking squiggles here on the right side. Is that a 13? Is that a B? We've got some data, visual data. Our top-down processing is where our brains look at that and assign a meaning to it. I see a 13 there, I see a B there. And that kind of processing comes from your prior knowledge. Things that you have already learned help you organize new information into a meaningful pattern. So my experience teaches me that when something looks like this, it must be a number. Context, though, is very important. So this 13 all on its own, well, maybe it's a 13, but maybe it's something else. I don't have anything around it right now to help me interpret. And so the way we see information in its context does actually matter. Top-down processing is different from bottom-up processing, where we look at the features, the parts, the pieces of something in order to try to make sense of it. This is particularly good for new information because we don't have any sort of prior knowledge to help us say immediately what is that thing. And so we're trying to look at those pieces and those parts and see, can we build up a perception of it based on the parts and then make some sense of it. People engage in both of these processes all the time, so we're not either or. This is the brain's job to take in data, use prior knowledge to figure out what it is, and if we don't know what it is, then we get to learn about it for the first time. So, is it a number or is it a letter? Well, it just depends. Context matters in this case. And so if you're looking at the top row, then your top-down processing would say it's a letter. But if I only gave you the bottom row, you'd say it's a number. The brain is a very efficient pattern organizer. Unfortunately, it can be overwhelmed, or maybe not unfortunately, maybe that's just by design. One way that we can show how the brain can be overwhelmed with patterns is the Stroop test. The Stroop test involves you reading these colors. So you look at the color, read the name. Blue, green, purple, green, red, blue, green, orange, orange, blue, red, gray, blue, purple. Now read the colors they actually represent. Red, blue, black, red, orange, green, purple, black, orange, red, blue, green, black, orange, purple, red. Oh my gosh, that's a little bit harder, is it not? That's two sets of data that you're trying to make sense of. The name of this object, which is easy for you to read, but then the actual identification of the color itself, which must come from inside your prior experience, because it's not actually on the page, except just visually. Psychologists have researched, starting in the 19th century, how we build up an understanding of the world around us so that we quickly can identify those patterns and come to expect certain things to look certain ways. These Gestalt principles are a number of built-in tendencies through experience which help us to organize incoming sensory information. We have learned over time, starting in infancy, that information in our world around us follows certain kinds of predictable patterns or experiences that make sense to us. This simplifies the problem of recognizing an object. So therefore, you don't really have to stress about bottom-up processing it all the time. Gestalt just fills that in for you. One of those is figure ground. We automatically separate the background from the foreground of an image, so we see the front of something from the back of something. This is a vase on a black background. But if you pay attention to the black background, you'll notice there are faces there. Proximity and similarity are two other Gestalt principles. Objects that are near each other are seen as going together. So we perceive something that's close as being related. Similarity also suggests that objects that are alike visually must be going together. So we look at the objects and presume or assume that because of their similarity, they must have some kind of connection or relationship. So not only do we separate the figure of an object from its background, foreground from background, we judge according to similarity as well as the closeness of the objects to each other. Continuity is another Gestalt principle, and that is one in which we perceive a smooth line as forming one complete object. So we follow that line as if the line separates it from the rest of the world, making it one identifiable object, such as this interconnected line here appears to be one thing and not merely a bunch of separate squiggles. Another important Gestalt figure is even when, or principle, not figure, but Gestalt principle is even when the line is missing, we impose closure. That means that we complete the figure even when the line is not actually drawn in. We can see where the line would be. So for example, we see a star here. Even though there's actually not a star drawn in at all, we still see the star. This is a panda, even though the line's not drawn in. Our brains automatically connect those and put in place the line that we should expect to be there. Humans also have depth perception, which can be tricked, such as the sidewalk art that you see where artists, very gifted artists, are making you capable of believing that there's a teacup on the ground or a giant hole that has emerged. This depth perception also gives us some very, very powerful abilities as humans to make judgments about the world around us. And certainly that's very helpful that our eyes face forward as opposed to animals who have eyes on the sides of their heads. Depth perception comes from two different kinds of cues. Binocular means two eye. So if both of your eyes are functioning, you get two different pieces of data about the world. Slightly different pieces of data. Monocular means one eye cues. So if you lost an eye or closed an eye, you still can perceive some depth. One monocular cue is known as relative size. An object that appears to be larger is closer. And we've all done this when we've held our thumbs up and said, my thumb is bigger than your head. Right now, it is. It's closer to you. See, look at that giant thumb. So much closer to you, therefore it appears bigger to you, even though we actually know my thumb's not as big as my head. Linear perspective is important for artists. All lines converge at the horizon at the vanishing point, as it's known, and that linear perspective helps us judge distance. This vanishing point is further away from us. We can see both of these things even with just one eye. Interposition is another important monocular cue in which an object that is overlapping another object, not exactly in front of, but merely overlapping, is closer to you. The one that is on top must be the closer object. This is the closer horse. It is in front of that horse. A third monocular cue is texture gradient. Detail implies closeness. Detail, visible detail, means that we can see lots and lots of particular aspects of a scene, and those must be closer to us. Whereas the blurrier material in the back that sort of all blends together must be further away. That's known as texture gradient. We also judge distance by light and shadow. Heavily shadowed objects are further away. So we perceive them as being in the distance. They're more shaded to our eye. For functioning two-eye perspective or binocular perspective, we rely on the fact that our eyes actually have slightly different views of the world. And you can test this by holding your hand in front of one of your eyes, focusing on an object, and then alternating back and forth. You can also do it with an object that you hold in the middle of your eyes as well, and switch your eyes back and forth. When you do that, you'll notice the object you focused on seems to move. And that's because your eyes are separated from each other. Therefore, they're seeing slightly different pictures of the world. The apparent position of an object, as seen by the left versus the right eye, will indicate the distance of that object. So having two eyes, two different visions of the world, gives us a disparity between those two and helps us judge distance. We also learn some constancies with our perception of the world. And those help us navigate so that we don't have to bottom-up process everything. We can top-down process and just move on with our day. Our brain becomes very efficient at making judgments about the world so that we don't have to use a lot of brain power to judge every single thing as if it's new. We learn these tendencies to perceive objects as the same even when their physical characteristics appear to change to us. Great example is size. I know that a basketball a mile away is still the same size as a basketball that is right up close to me. Imagine how awful it would be for us if we assumed faraway objects actually were physically smaller. And we can kind of go back to the whole thumb thing. If I believed that my thumb actually was as big as my head, that would be a not so useful a way to navigate the world. Shape is another constancy. we learned that even if you rotate an object in space, the object is still that object. This is an iPhone no matter how I rotate it in space. Its shape hasn't changed. I just know that its rotation in space means that I see it from a different angle. Color is another one, and that's one that we can play with in terms of tricking the eye. We do learn to perceive colors differently depending on what's around them, and that can sometimes trick us and make the appearance of a change in color. That's why when you're picking out a new paint for your house, you want to take a look at that paint in different light. So in the morning light, in the sunlight, in the midday light. What does it look like in fluorescent light, LED light? Because your eye will see it slightly differently, even though we know that paint color is exactly the same when we pull it out of the can. So all of these constancies do help us navigate the world, but they can be used sometimes to trick us and make us think we see things that aren't actually there. Another one of these aspects of our brains that is fun to play with is this inborn perception of features, which occurs in the face fusiform gyrus back here in the occipital lobe. This is known as pareidolia, where we perceive a familiar pattern where none actually exists, because your brain has a series of what are called feature detectors, which identify specific features in a scene and have sort of built-in pattern recognition for those features. Faces are a great example of our inborn wiring for these features. Faces are wired for us to see. We see faces in just about everything. In fact, it's so important to us that people can have a condition, prosopagnosia, where you cannot recognize an individual face. That is, you can see that there's line there is shadow, there's light, there's dark, but there's nothing about that face that identifies it as a particular person. You might identify people by a voice or by a particular thing that they wear, but the actual face doesn't help you. We're so good at this, we see faces in all kinds of things. Faces in church buildings, onions, handbags, backpacks, the foam in your drink, even on a piece of burnt toast. Look, it's Jesus in burnt toast. Colors and the arrangement of objects in a scene can be also used to trick us into thinking that there's movement there. If you stare at this in one place, you can make it stop. But if you're just casting your eye around the scene, it appears to be rotating. These are known as saccades, or saccadal movement, where the eyes are constantly moving. And because our eyes are constantly moving, we perceive the illusion of movement there. Many aspects of our perception are cultural, in that we are learning about perceiving the world based on the culture that we grow up in. And the way we think about the world can be influenced by those experiences. Different environments create different perceptions of space and how space is organized and designed and used. And people who grow up in those different environments will learn something different from you and I. This might translate into different vocabulary for those same perceptions. Recent research has shown that people might name what they see differently depending on those experiences around the world. I think about the ancient Greeks who talked about the sea as wine dark, which suggested that it was sort of like a blackish color to them. Whereas I perceive the sea as green or sometimes even brown, depending on which, part of the ocean I'm looking at. And that just sort of in my mind is a great illustration of how I can interact with something in the world and see it slightly differently than someone from a different culture. What about ESP, or perception beyond the five senses? Is that really a thing? In the 70s, it was hot to investigate. There were lots of parapsychology programs and investigations going on in the United States to try to figure out, are people clairvoyant? Can people actually read minds and know things beyond the five senses? To date, there is no research that supports that people can engage in telepathy or reading thoughts. No research in precognition or foretelling the future. No research that proves someone is clairvoyant, perception beyond sight. No research that supports psychokinesis, bending or moving objects without actually touching them.